Hi, John.
Well, good afternoon.
Afternoon. How are you?
Good.
Good. So, are you going to be sharing your screen today? Or is Tim?
I will.
Okay. Thank you. Hi, Tim.
Hey,
How are you?
good. Mic check. I sound all right?
Yes.
All
Perfect.
right. How's John sound? Like usual?
Yeah, fantastic.
John, once you're all set with the slides, we can make sure you can share your screen, okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, and then right at 2, I can do a quick intro and then I'll pass it off to you guys and you can go ahead and get started.
Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Shan McKenzie. I am the Learning and Development Coordinator here at Bonadio. As you come in, just going to go over a quick housekeeping things. Please make sure you can see the content, okay? Be sure your speakers or earphones are on, and to adjust your audio, please click More at the top of the window. Choose Settings, then Device Settings, and use the drop-down menus to make changes. If you have any questions or experience any technical issues, please drop in the chat and I'll be sure to help. Thank you.
Ready to roll, John?
Yes, I am.
All right. Let's go ahead and get going. Great to have you all join us today. Talk a little bit about from strategy to success, harnessing some scenario and impact analysis for better decision making. This is one in a series of many of trainings that we've done for what we consider sort of our C-suite training series. If you've had the fortunate or unfortunate opportunity to listen to me over the past year, I've done a couple other trainings on strategic planning and corporate strategy, and sort of initiating change within your organization. And so this is kind of another training in that series that John and I have put together. Mostly John. He did a lot of the heavy lifting here, as he works a lot with organizations in talking about scenario and impact analysis. And so he's got a lot of great and awesome things to talk about today. Really happy to have again John with me. Just again, my name is Tim Ball. I have the pleasure of overseeing our advisory and consulting division at the Bonadio Group. I have around 160 phenomenal professionals that specialize in consulting and advisory services. If you think about a CPA firm, it has audit and it has tax, and then it has everything else and all the other stuff we call sort of non-traditional services, and most of those fit into our advisory and consulting service line. And then John, I'd love you to give yourself a quick intro in the areas that you specialize in.
All right, thank you, Tim. So, Jonathan Miller, I am a partner in the consulting and advisory service line. I have a concentration in healthcare, higher ed, and nonprofit industries, as Tim mentioned. I do work on a lot of these KPIs, strategy, kind of implementing it as well. I am pleased to say, after 22 years, 18 months ago, I became a recovering auditor. So now I kind of more focus on over here. I know some of my clients will ask me to do something or say, I technically can't do that anymore. And they give me a weird look. And I'm like, it's not because I didn't forget. It's because I'm over in the different division. And as we'll get through this, there's a risk today that I'm not actually allowed to sign certain things anymore. But that's a little bit about me. What we'll do is we'll just start jumping right into this. And we lay out the agenda on complexities of today's competitive environment. Tim loves, after I usually go over these things, he'll say, you're preparing to get that lump of coal for Christmas, and I don't really have any of that Christmas cheer and joy. But I think it's important for folks to hear about where we are. Tim will talk back through and remind some of the group folks that have attended the previous sessions on what really corporate strategy is. And then what I'll do is I'll walk through really how to measure that success, how to use KPIs and analytics and scenario impact to really truly impact and show how resilient your strategy is, as well as monitoring it along the way. All right, so complexities of today's environment. I think we can all sit there and say, or really not all of us, but really, as Billy Joel said, that, the world's always been on fire. It's always been burning since it's been turning. But what I look at today and what's occurring is the velocity of that change has increased significantly. That first bullet, rapid technological advancements. If we think about where we were 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, even 2 months ago, and we think about AI and automation, and I'm just looking at my emails and I'm writing now, Microsoft Outlook is finishing my thought for me, and all I got to do is hit tab. If you were to tell me 6 months ago that would have been happening, I wouldn't believe you. But with that AI, automation, digital, there's a lot more information out there. I'll say a lot more data out there that we got to be cognizant of. Then you're seeing data analyticals. And then everything related to technology, underneath it, there are some bad actors out there, cybersecurity. So that is becoming an increased risk. I'll skip over workforce a little bit, but economic pressures. We all are aware we live in a more globalized environment now. Something that happens on the other side of the world is impacting us more now than it ever has. And then here in the United States, I think we're all very well aware we're going to have a new presidential administration coming in. One of the things we're getting from whether it's a business owner or a nonprofit, what are we looking at least minimum on the tax changes, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act? We're fielding questions. Are they going to extend it? Not going to extend it. What are the new regulations out of some of these departments going to be? So those are economic pressures, but they're also going to trickle down to us. And then what else? I'll talk about the workforce challenges as well. I think we all, again, know this, but we're looking at skills gaps, remote versus hybrid, burnout. And then lastly, the social and cultural shifts. There has been a change in demographics influencing behavior in the workforce. And what that means is your customers, including and also your employees, are no longer just looking at the value that your good or service provides, but they're also looking at the value that you bring to all the stakeholders and community. And they're going to be judging you on that. So all those pressures are coming together. And I think those that are slower to adapt or not making these changes, the risk to them is greater. While those that are coming in and disrupting or saying, we're going to make these changes and we got a vision to make these changes, they're going to be the ones that are going to seize that opportunity.
Yeah, John, and I just want to hit on one thing. If you want to just go back, John, to that slide. One thing that I've been hearing a lot from our clients, and this is going to be a little bit of my opinion here, but when we think about AI in automation, we have a lot of clients asking, are we behind? Are we doing all the things we're supposed to? I go to conferences, I read articles, I hear about all these great ways that people are using AI to half run their business for them. What I'll tell you is, even at our firm, and I feel that we're very forward thinking and utilizing technology. We are in the infancy stage of evaluating different ways to utilize AI. We have some smaller committees and task force that are using AI in different ways to just help us with some day-to-day tasks. And we're looking at ways in which we can use automation more to increase the efficiency of the work that we do in the service that we provide clients. But everyone feels behind. I have not seen a lot of companies yet that are completely, at the tip of innovation right now as it relates to utilizing AI. Everyone's kind of waiting around to see how things are going and who really starts to show really good use cases of AI. I think there are a lot of pockets of organizations that are finding different ways to use AI to be a little more efficient. I think that's the right way to go. But I will say, if you're on this call and you feel woefully behind, like I read all this stuff, it seems too complex, my organization isn't using AI at all. Here's the one thing I would recommend to you. We're going to talk a little bit about data in a little further in this presentation. We're going to talk about making sure that you understand the data that your organization is producing and how you're capturing it, saving it, and potentially utilizing it. I would say that if you feel woefully behind on AI and automation, at the very least, you should start to get an understanding of the types of data that your organization produces and that you maintain and keep in your organization. Because at some point, when a tool gets introduced to you or to your organization that says, hey, this is going to make your life a lot easier, it's going to want access to certain types of data to do its job. And so the best thing that you can do in any type of executive position in your organization is just make sure that when that time comes, if you're a little behind everyone else, but that time comes and that tool is introduced and your colleagues around the industry start to use it, your organization will be ready, because at least they'll know where all its data is that this tool or automation tool is going to be able to access. So just, again, if you don't take a whole lot away from sort of the complexities and concern of the current competitive environment, I will tell you, at least make sure that you have a good inventory of the data that your organization is producing and creating and maintaining and saving, where it is, and whether that you and make sure you have good knowledge of that. Just a little pitch in there for you. Let's go ahead and move on, John. So let's talk a little bit. I'm going to touch on this briefly. We've done some other trainings on corporate strategy creation, but I think, again, just to remind everyone, if you're sitting there today and not really knowing what exactly the sort of forward-looking 2, 3, 5-year strategy is for your organization, you don't necessarily have a good strategic plan in place, it is probably time to think about doing one, and to think about educating your entire organization as to what the strategy is. And what the vision is of your organization. Now more than ever, because of some of those changes in the culture, in the corporate environment that John talked about, it's important for organizations to understand their identity and understand where they want to go. Because I do feel that over the next few years, we're going to be introduced a lot of factors and changes in our industries are going to be introduced to our organizations, and we're going to have to start making some pivots and changes based on what our mission is. And we want to make sure that organizations hold steady to what their actual vision and mission really is and maintain. So I would say if you're in the middle of a strategic plan, congrats. You better be ready to make some pivots and changes based on the things that you established as your strategic plan. And if you haven't done one in a while as an organization, it might be time to think about putting one together and working on that. I'll tell you, the Bonadio Group, our firm, we just went through a very long, somewhat exhaustive strategic planning session and created our next strategic plan for our next 5 years. It is extremely awesome process, and we communicated it to all of all the folks within our organization. They all understand it. We've posted it on our intranet, so everyone can see what our strategic plan is, and then we plan every move we make as an organization, the things that we want to accomplish as a CPA firm, and the things we invest in can all be tied back into that strategic plan as it relates to what's important to us, what our values are, and where it is that we want to go. And so just again, a reminder, we've talked about this in some other sessions, but make sure you're kind of up to speed. And we'll talk about, okay, now so this presentation sort of starts with the idea, like, you got a strategic plan, you got some things that you want to go and do. We're going to tell you some of the things that you can do to help you as you continue to initiate and complete the objectives in your strategic plan. So next slide, John. So again, briefly, a good corporate strategy's got four main foundational pieces. The vision is, what are you trying to achieve? Mission is, why do we do what we do? Right? Your sort of core values is kind of the mission and values. And then your strategy. Where are we going to focus our efforts over this next period of time, depending on how long your strategic plan is? And so if you have a good corporate strategy, you understand what grounds you, you understand the vision and sort of the values of your organization, and now you've got some strategy. So as an example, if your strategic plan is to double the size of your organization or expand into a new geographic region of service and find new customers, or it's to expand the services that you provide or the products that you create, that would be sort of your strategy, and you're going to want to initiate that based on your sort of core values and the vision of your organization. And so we're going to talk today about the strategic piece of corporate strategy and some of the different things that you can utilize to accomplish your objectives. Go ahead, John. I think it's back to you, right, John? Or is this one me too?
No, that one's you, but I can take it.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
All right, great. So one of the things that, Tim didn't just lay out that, we have an exhaustive, we just finished the strategic planning just to say, hey, it's a Bonadio commercial, we did this. It's also something, that Tim and I work every day to implement. So it's not just us lecturing you today. We're actually going to talk about some of the things we actually do. And one of the things is Tim and I work together a lot, and we work, whether it's with our clients, whether the firm, I always kind of bring back to Tim and say strategies is a set of choices. And you make choices whether at the corporate level, where the vision is, or by what you do every day. So every day I come in here and I'm executing that strategy by making a choice. Do I close my door and not delegate something? Or do I go and say, you know what, learning and development is part of our corporate strategy. I'm going to go delegate, sit down with someone and do something differently. That's what we mean by a set of choices. Also, one of the things I say too, when we talk about choices, that means trade-offs. It's not obvious action. So one of the things too, when we think about making a strategic choice, it is, what is the trade-off? And the trade-off is like, well, I wouldn't do that anyways. No one would do that. So you have a choice to lower cost. The opposite of that is to not lower cost. That's not a strategic choice. That's just an obvious one. So that kind of lays out what we're thinking about today and how we're going to align this. But again, the strategy needs to be lived and breathed every day, and you have a choice to follow through on the investments that you said you were going to make when you laid it out. All right. Tim, you want this? I can take this one too.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So foundations of strategic decision making and the power of intentionality. What we do when we create a strategic plan is we say, this is the course, this is the vision. Tim kind of laid it out. This is where we want to be in the future. We set out what's going to differentiate us, what's going to make us win in the future. And what we want is we want to be making decisions about where we want to go, not being reactive. So the left side of the screen is some of these reactives. Oh, the economy went down. Guess we're going to cut back the safety program that we said we're going to put in place. A supplier was no longer able to service us. We're going to lose revenue. We're just going to lay a bunch of people off. That's reactive. Versus if we can be proactive, and I often say you got to hold the vision, being proactive. You what you say is, okay, the economy went down. Well, where can we pick up where can we pick up operational efficiency that maybe when the economy goes down, we don't have to make cuts to our workforce. A new player comes into the market, instead of reacting and saying, well, we're going to stop this product line. What makes us different? Maybe it's the quality we bring, and let's stick to that. Let's be proactive. So that's really the power of intentionality. And then the following slides on this kind of walk you through how you can stay that course and that power of intentionality.
Yeah, and the biggest thing we'll talk about a little bit today is part of strategic planning and part of sort of scenario creation and analysis is the idea that you can be proactive even when you're reacting to something that might have been mildly unexpected. And so again, good planning says, hey, this is our plan for the next 5 years. Well, let's talk about if the economy makes a shift. What would our shift be to continue to stay on route with our plan? If we lose a bunch of employees and we have a hard time filling positions, what are some of the shifts that we could potentially make, and what would that impact on both of our costs and our quality of our product, or the cost and price of our product be? It's interesting because we work with a lot of organizations that kind of, and I think I'll compare it to something funny. We've all worked for managers and for supervisors and other things that are very reactive. They sort of operate with their hair on fire. Things happen, something doesn't go as planned, and they're calling you on a Friday night, calling you over the weekend saying, oh my God, we can't believe we didn't see this coming. We've got to figure this out. And if you've been working for them, you've often thought, well, we probably did see that coming. We could have seen that was coming all along. I wish we didn't have to always act like our hair was on fire. We work with a lot of organizations that operate just like that too. It's like a something happens that's not necessarily very unexpected from an industry standpoint. Like they lose, their CFO just decides to quit. And it's a big, powerful position within their organization, has a lot of responsibilities, and they quit. And that organization acts like we have no idea what to do now that the CFO is gone. But if they had good policies and procedures, if they had good backups for the different responsibilities of the CFO, if they always had done some scenario planning for what happens if we lose key people in our finance or executive team, what would our reaction be? They might be able to be proactive on something that is somewhat of an emergency issue. And so we'll talk a little bit about strategic or scenario planning today. As it relates, so even in times when you have to be reactive, in a sense, you can be proactive with your reaction. So go ahead, John.
All right. So the role of KPIs to drive strategy. Again, I'm going to go through kind of at what I would call a beginner level, just to set the framework. But I think if you're attending this webinar and you're signed up, you probably know what these are, and you probably have them. But again, just to kind of lay the groundwork. So when I say KPI, I mean a key performance indicator. And what those are is they're measurable values that help organizations track their progress towards those strategic goals that you laid out before. They take kind of what I'll say is the up in the air vision that the higher ups have set, and you said, let's take that abstract and let's put it into something measurable. And what you want to do is you want to track the progress. That's where you hear the term dashboards. That's where you hear the term, we'll get a little bit later, is the data. But you want to be able to see how's it trending. Why they're important. What they do is, again, I keep talking about their tracking. They're letting you know, are you following through on your plan? Are you meeting success? What direction are you trending? So they measure the performance. They identify areas for improvement if you're not trending in the right direction. And most importantly, they drive accountability. And a couple of the other slides we'll go down, and you'll see how they drive accountability. But I would also say,
go ahead, John. Keep going, buddy.
Last, I'll finish this. Turn over to Tim. Is the other thing about KPIs? You got to pick the right KPIs, and I think everyone's like, well, that's obvious. Well, this is what our strategy. If our strategy is to get market share, we're not going to be worried about safety. Okay, yeah, we all know that, but a lot of times I'll see clients and they'll have the KPIs, or they'll have, well, this is what's in the industry, or we have this. They just have things because they think they have to have them. It's more important to go through the exercise and figure out what the right KPIs are for you. And you'll see on the next slide too, a few slides later, what are the right KPIs by level within your organization, You can see the bullet. Obviously, make them actionable. So if you see a trend or a measure not going the right direction, can you react to it? And then lastly, balancing leading and lagging indicators. So what does that mean? A lagging indicator, that's kind of what happened in the past. Easiest one or most relatable one, gross profit margin. That's something that has happened in the past. However, a leading one will kind of say what's going to happen in the future. I would think about that maybe in terms of sales referrals or intake coming into your facility. Those are things that would be leading KPIs.
Yeah, well said, John. And I think, again, for folks that are on this call, I'm sure many of you are running organizations utilizing KPIs fairly regularly. And I would ask that one of the things that you do is continue to evaluate your KPIs and whether you care about them. We have a lot of organizations that track a ton of KPIs and they look at them every month and they kind of compare them to the prior month. And they're like, yeah, those look good. Well, what does the KPI actually mean? And what would you do if it actually started to change or move as it's related to its history? And so I think that, and if you're running an organization now, or you're in a leadership position or new to a leadership position in your organization, and you don't have KPIs or you don't know what your KPIs are, we've got some examples in the next slides, just some food for thought, some things to think about, very, very basic ones. But we'll go through some examples of why KPIs can be important for different types of organizations and some things that you may want to measure. And to give you a really simple example, if part of your strategic plan was to create a organization that people wanted to work at and wanted to stay at, wanted to have their entire career at your organization, one of your KPIs you may measure is something as simple as just turnover, right? How long people stay in the positions that you have. And here it is right here in a healthcare organization. You might look at that in the employee turnover KPI. But just as an example, it's an easy KPI to measure. A lot of organizations, when we talk to them, we say, hey, what's your turnover ratio looking like right now? Like, how many people are you losing / gaining? They can't tell us. They don't measure that KPI, even though they're very concerned about the cost of turnover. They're very concerned about longevity in positions and skill sets that are within their organization. They maybe aren't necessarily tracking it and matching that trend up to other things like overtime hours, comparing it into, again, profitability, comparing it into sales gen, all sorts of other factors which might lead into things like turnover. So I'm going to turn it back to John. So you're going to talk a little bit about some of these KPIs that we're using as examples. We've picked a few out to talk about, and we've tried to give you guys a mix of different types of industries that these KPIs would come out of.
Yep. And obviously, I said in the beginning, I focused on the tax exempt industry. So I'm going to focus on that one, nonprofit. So no matter what type of organization I'm looking at, even nonprofit is one of the first ratios I jump to in operations is looking at the labor as a percentage of revenue. And why I look at this, it's really an efficiency metric, but it's saying how many people or how many hours did it actually take to produce this outcome? And you can say whether it's this grant award or whether it's patient days in a nursing home, et cetera. I look at that because it's such a good indicator, and you can benchmark it too. I always say be careful what you benchmark it against. Is it accurate or not? But when you see it starting to go up, it can say what's going on here? Why is labor as a percentage of revenue going up? Tim talked a little bit employee turnover about, okay, overtime's up. Well, why is overtime up? Are we not doing something relating to engaging our workforce? Contract labor up. So that obviously means maybe we're having to utilize our workforce came to supplement it. We're using contract labor. Other things too, where I can look at it and say, okay, an example that something I looked at a couple months ago on a nonprofit who actually utilizes a retail store to bring in donations. I looked at it and said, well, your labor as a percentage of revenue seems out of whack. The more I looked at it, I said, you got a problem in the sales cycle, because what you're not doing is all the people are there, they're working very hard, but we're not turning those customers coming in into actual sales. So that was a key point in when we were looking at is that revenue. The other thing I'll say too is when we look at it is obviously everyone says, well, we want it, to be as low as we can. Don't get too low either. And what that means is are your people working too hard and are they getting burned out? So it's also important to monitor the floor on it as well. Tim, do you want to take one or you want me to take another one?
Well, like I love labor percentage of revenue sometimes when we think about specific departments. And so I'll give you an example. John and I review finance departments all the time. We get asked by organizations to tell them, hey, what's a perfect setup of our finance department and function? How many people do we need in it? What's a good reporting, hierarchy? How do we have good controls? I mean, that's a question we get asked all the time. If one of the things that you can monitor in a growing organization, whether it's for profit or nonprofit, is the labor the labor percentage, labor expense percentage in your finance function compared to revenue, because more revenue in any type of organization, it's it's a lot more work in finance, right? It's more billing, more bills to pay, it's more money coming in. It's more payroll. It's everything that's associated with gaining that revenue as a percentage of revenue in your finance department. And so sometimes what we've done is a historical look back at, hey, when you were a $10 million organization, your finance function was X percentage of total revenue. Now that you're a $70 million organization, you're the percentage of finance expense is half of what it was as a percentage of revenue. That might tell you that there's just not enough people in finance to handle all the responsibilities that come with a larger company. Now, what's been really interesting over this last year, just to get into some fun stuff, John and I have seen such an advent of automation and AI assisting in the finance function. A lot of things. Paying bills used to be we wrote 100 checks a month. Now we can pay a lot more bills electronically using different types of sites like bill.com and other things. The process is in half the time. So looking back historically 5 years ago, that ratio to revenue might not necessarily be apples to apples of what you're comparing about now, but it's surely interesting to know. And so sometimes when an organization says, how do I know if I have the right number of people in my finance function compared to how much revenue we have? We might compare them and benchmark them against some other organizations that are similar, easy to do in nonprofit and healthcare where the information is more publicly available. But we also might just compare them over a period of time. If nothing has changed in a way that the finance function is being done and revenue's doubled, I can tell you that the finance function is probably too small, right? Same thing can be said about other operational departments. Same thing can be said about HR. Same thing can be said about IT, in these other areas. So I don't necessarily we use KPIs sometimes as internal information for the organization as it relates to size and expense.
And, Tim took my thunder on the employee turnover. So I'll talk about client satisfaction. You're a contractor or service provider. The reason I bolded this one is we go back to the strategy and we say, what differentiates us? What puts us in a position to be better than our competitors? Some might say, well, our strategy is to provide the best satisfaction or the best quality of service to who we serve. And you should be monitoring this and you should be looking at those scores. And if they're kind of staying flat at the benchmark, that says you're not effectuating your strategy and you need to invest more into it.
Yeah, let's go to the next slide, John. I think we have a few more.
And then, we have the financial ones. You want to talk about the contribution margin one?
Yeah, I can talk about the contribution margin one. It's interesting, especially whether nonprofit or for profit. We often talk to a lot of organizations that aren't effectively really measuring their GP or contribution margin, especially dividing it out by different types of service, by service type, by department. If you look at some of the best for-profit organizations that are out there trying to make money, clearly this is something they typically do well, especially the good ones, because they're looking and measuring, GP as much as they can and understanding the contribution, whether it's machine hours, whether it's labor hours, whether it's expenses and all sorts of things. They're measuring it to their contribution margin fairly closely. What we often see in some of the nonprofit and other areas that aren't necessarily as worried about contribution margin is to go back to what John was talking about, is what are we actually making on every dollar of revenue that we come in? What does it take us? What does it take us from an expense standpoint to make that revenue piece, and then how much are we getting as an ROI or return on the revenue? Excuse me. And so in this case, measuring it often and measuring it in a way that divides it out and makes it digestible, right? Not just measuring it at the top level of the organization, but measuring it by different service types, different products, different departments, and things like that will help you measure profitability overall much more intently. And we'll also show you very early on. I mean, we have organizations that if their GP drops by a percentage point in 1 month or 2 months, they are already digging in to see what change needs to be made to try to right size GP. They figure it out within 30 days. They are on it, because a lot of organizations wait to the end of the year and then they scratch in their head like, holy crap, what did we do wrong this year? GP's way down over the year. You should know within 15 or 30 days, whatever your normal sort of close cycle is, which is usually a monthly accounting close. You should know GP's down and we should figure out why. John, I know you work so heavily with organizations in this area. I'm sure you have something to add.
Yeah, I was going to tell the one story we had on contribution margin a little bit later on. But I think the one thing a lot of folks will say in nonprofit, well, what does gross profit or contribution matter with healthcare or higher ed? And I always say You got to be making strategic choices between the service lines you do. And you got to see yourself as a business, and those are service lines. And to what Tim said is, what is your return on the investments back into those service lines to cover the administrative functions? Is why that ratio is important for those types of industries. Quickly, the one also I look at a lot is days cash on hand. And what days cash on hand is basically how much cash do we have in the bank to cover our operating expenses, provided another piece of revenue never came in. A lot of folks say, well, John, you know that's not a reality. We're always going to have more revenue. I say, stop looking at a point in time and benchmark it to others. Look at what the trend is. Is it going up or down? And that can show you if you have other issues, especially if it starts going down. What that's saying is you might have a revenue cycle issue, meaning your receivables days could be up. Other also could mean is you have high fixed costs. Tim talked about, the automation. Are you not turning some of that general and admin into automation and lowering your fixed costs to stay more competitive? All right, so we've done a good job the first half hour laying out the groundwork, and now we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of it. And I think it's I appreciate how Tim kind of talked in the beginning and reminded folks we have a strategic plan, and we're kind of a business. We are a business too. So not only do we look at it from clients, just like the hair club for men, we're not just the president, we're also a customer too. Well, one of us is a customer on this call, maybe.
A hair club for men, thanks. But what I can't go a half an hour without digging my bald head. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, what I'm trying to get at is even when you think how Tim and I operate, or folks above Tim, is we have different KPIs that are important to us, but we're all aligned. So what we did was we put this into a triangle to show how it's really all aligned. When we start at the top and we start at the strategic, that's really your C-suite. And really, they kind of say, here it is. Here's where our focus is. It's high up here. And I'm going to use an example as we go through this of, the C-suite wants to increase market share. Below them, I would say that's that's really your senior managers. They're in charge of what the process is. They got to take what the C-suite wants to do, and they got to take those goals and they got to make it actionable and operational, and they got to be able to support it. And really that bottom level, not to think about it as the bottom level, but that's more your department heads and your managers. They get more granular. So they take what's kind of been the initiative and they make it tactical. So you can see as you go through that, it's all going to be aligned, but they're going to have different KPIs. So at the top, I talked about market share. So as C-suite comes out, they say, we want to increase our market share. I think the first question that the senior manager should be in what? Geography, customer, service line, define it. But ultimately, they say it's going to be market share. Okay. So what the C-suite is going to look at is they're going to look at that percentage of market share and what they define they want to increase. The senior leadership is going to come at it and say, well, we need to increase market share. What are the KPIs important to us to increase that market share? What they're going to look at is they're going to say, okay, maybe we need to be looking at brand awareness. Do our customers know we exist? Are we able to retain customers? So what's our, are we able to retain customers? And then also what they're going to look at too is if they do increase market share, are they going to be able to deliver? So they are going to look at labor productivity. They're going to look at supply chain in that. You go down the next step to that, and that's more that granular tactical. All right, we want to create brand awareness. What does that look like at the marketing level? Well, is it clicks on the website? Is it sales reps getting acquiring new customers? On the expense side and the ability to actually produce profitably, are they looking at that expense per unit and tracking that? So that's kind of an example of how everything stays in a line through the triangle, but you might not necessarily have the same KPI across the organization.
Yeah, well done, John. Next slide. I just want to touch, John, on this first part, which kind of circles back to what I was talking about in the beginning, is really this data collection and data processing. I just want to again harp on this as an organization. I mean, I would like you to think about the last time, and hopefully all of you say, dude, it was recently, but maybe you don't. When was the last time you really did an inventory of all the data that's available within your organization, within the systems that you use, and with all of the things that are happening with your organization, everything from potential, from sales, from donors, to all of the information that's within your financial system, to customer base, databases, to anything related to your website, visitors, clicks, to all of your industry data that you might have available, that is available to you, benchmarking, all those things. what is all the data, and have you done an inventory of all of it? And then what of those data pieces can you ultimately use to analyze and to create KPIs as relationship data? So just again, just to go back to that first thing is like if you don't do anything from today's call and you haven't done that, at least start with an inventory of the data that's available to you and how you're ultimately saving it and capturing it. Because the other thing that we see organizations do is they do have a lot of data. It is flowing through their organization and they are not saving it. They don't know exactly how to use it yet, and they don't know if they'll ever use it, but they have no way of ultimately saving it. The system's scrubbing it every year at the end of the year or every 2 years, or whatever the case may be. And someday, 3 years from now, when a tool comes through and says, hey, we can do all this stuff with your historical data to tell you forecasting where you're going to be in 6 months, we haven't really been doing a good job of saving on that, or we don't know where the heck it is. So just again, the plug for that, keep an eye on it. So now, John, I'll turn it back over to you to talk about real KPIs.
We'll walk you through this. We'll walk you through this arrow, but the punchline of this slide is what one of my clients who I talk to quite frequently has said to me a couple times over the last 2 years. Is we have all sorts of data, but what we need to be good at is turning that data into information. And that's what he says to me, and I'm like, that's correct. It's a hospital, so you can imagine the reams of patient data. And he says it's not really worth it until I can make it information. So kind of how do we do that at the KPI level is what Tim just talked about, inventorying your data, getting a data collection, also maybe figuring out what you're trying to measure and can you rely on it. And then what you do is you put it into a format, and whether you're using Excel or something else, there's all sorts of more tools too, especially as the cost of technology goes down. We're seeing products like a data rails or Google's now coming out with stuff. You can put all the stuff into there. You can use a Power BI or a Tableau as well. But one of the things I always say is, as Tim said, get the inventory. Make sure you know what you're measuring first. Make sure it's good before you spend all your time converting it into one of these systems and then reporting it. But in the middle, reporting it is you should have a tool. And I know some of you are all at various levels of what your organization is, but you should have a tool that you can make visual dashboards and reports. The technology is available. There's a lot of positions. The kids in college are learning how to do it. I've even learned how to do it. But where I like to say in reporting, and again, it kind of goes a little bit with my hospital background, is it needs to be as simple and insightful that the smartest doctor in the world can understand it and pick it up in 7 seconds, because that's what you got with them to figure it out. And that's what you want when you're reporting on that dashboard. And then lastly, it's great we did the first 3 things and we spent all this time doing this. What Tim also kind of makes the point, we talk about this a lot, is now you got to monitor and you continuously track it. It's not just about getting the KPI and saying what are the indicators. You always got to keep your foot on the gas on it, because that goes back to the beginning of what we talked about, this changing environment. And then lastly, now you're monitoring it, you're trending it, you're reporting it, you're telling the story. You have to use that to make those, what I'll call those proactive decisions. You'll hold the line and you're not making these reactive decisions, because you can see the data. And one of the stories I have with the data collection is been working with a facility, and we're trying to get a contribution margin. And we've been trying for 3 months, and we keep looking at it differently. And then we measure it, and then we pull back and say, here's another way that maybe we should be looking at it. So even when we report it, but we're not at the point yet where we make the decision. That shows because we have all these reams of data feeding into us, supply costs, revenue costs, all this. And still after 3 months of really smart people, we're not getting to the right point in data collection, because even internally, we're not asking the right questions. So there's an example that it's not as easy as we think to get that right data, to what Tim said about inventorying. Okay. All right. So shifting gears a little bit on scenario and impact analysis, now that we talked about KPIs and how this can effectuate your strategy. What scenario analysis is, I think everyone, again, knows what this is on its face, but really what it is, it's a tool to explore multiple possible, what I'll say, futures, what could happen. It's not saying here's a prediction of the future. What it's doing is it's setting you up to be able to plan for the future. So you can see there an example of a scenario analysis. What if sales or volume increases or decreases by 10%? So again, if sales go up by 10%, do you have the workforce and supply chain to be able to fill that demand? But also, what if it goes down 10%? What are you going to have to do? Should you be investing in equipment? What happens if you change your price? What, are more people going to come? People are going to say, I don't want to do this, but maybe the price goes up, you have less, and you end up having less labor costs, product launch, and work over turnover. That's kind of some of the things about looking at scenario analysis. When I do a lot of the forecasting for organizations, there's always a sensitivity analysis in it, but I also kind of put it as to a scenario analysis. So now we get to see what happens when revenue goes down 10%, or expenses go up 10%, or interest rates go up. Now what we're doing is we're making decisions saying, well, this is what would happen to cash flows. Okay, what would we do differently now? So again, even some of the takeaways, some folks say, hey, we do this, especially during the pandemic, we certainly started doing it. Again, it's the point of doing this is not to remove uncertainty. The point of doing it is to start planning for it and making proactive and not reactive decisions related to it.
Yeah, I think scenario analysis is actually, when you have the time, can be really fun to actually do, and especially if we've seen some really good analysis tools that have been built by our consultants for our clients and been built sometimes by our client. If you think about it in its simplest form, if you create widgets, manufacture widgets, you can get all the way down into the amount of supplies, equipment, man hours, and space needed to create a single widget. And if you then do some of these scenario analysis on what happens if we bring on a new customer that expands our sales or our manufacturing requirement by 10%, by 20%, by 30%, at what point do we need to get a second space and have more overhead? At what point do we need to expand our overhead support, all of our back office support for number of employees, number of workers on the floor? At what point do our workers all meet capacity? If you get down into the granular level of the products and services that you provide, you can often then create really robust scenario analyses and compare them into your strategy. So, okay, if we want to spend more time on quality, okay, what is the impact that would have to our bottom line? What is the impact that would have to the number of people we have to have out on the floor or providing that service? So scenario analysis can be super powerful. It can also be extremely simple. As John said, there can be very simple ways to analyze a P&L, or even in a sense your balance sheet, by saying, let's say that investment income goes up by 10% over the next year under the new administration. What does that mean for us as far as what we have in savings? What happens to our additional investments, and what can we do in operations with that? What happens if it goes the other way? You'll see that there's a difference. John talked about forecasting. Forecasting is typically a straightforward forecast model over a period of time. Scenario analysis is typically an analysis that says, okay, where do we want to be? And then what's 10% worse than that, and what's 10% better than that, right? That is pretty much scenario analysis. So keep that in mind as you're looking to use those. Our best clients, our most proactive business owners and executives, always are asking for good scenario analysis. Like, okay, if we make that move and it works really good, what happens? If it works, how we kind of plan what happens, and what if it doesn't work? What happens? Can I have those numbers? I want to see what that starts to look like so that they can make very strategic decisions as to whether that decision is a good one and what's going to ultimately happen from that. And to tie it back to the beginning, whether it actually fits still into the strategic plan and the vision of what you're trying to accomplish as an organization. I probably stole some of your thunder, John, so I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's why I started smiling. So
I know, I saw it, buddy.
Yeah. So here is, the steps to do it. Tim wouldn't let me put a person trying to climb these steps up over it, but you can see I attempted to make some steps. So first thing, it's kind of goes without speaking. Identify the scenario. Don't be all over the place when throwing these things at the wall. Or I know I had a client during COVID that said, I made 18 different scenarios. Well, no, you didn't make 18 different scenarios. You made 18 different sensitivities, or you probably had 4 scenarios and five sensitivities that probably didn't get you anywhere because now you had too much data and not enough information. So first, identify what you're trying to do. We've talked about today market share, disruptions, strategic growth opportunities. So then from there, identify what I would say is your critical uncertainties related to it. Tim used a bunch of them. What happens if the economy changes under economic conditions? What happens if the customers say, you know what, that's not an organization I want to be around because you haven't made the right investments in social causes? What if you have turnover? So identify what you think is crucial or critical, or I'll even use sensitive uncertainty in your business to apply them to those scenarios. And then obviously develop plausible scenarios. Recently working with a client, and I think you might say, of course, we're going to identify plausible ones, but working with a client, and we're kind of going through developing some scenario analysis. And one of them is they're going to cut, one of the scenarios was they're going to cut expense by 15%. And essentially one of the board members came back and said, well, is that even plausible? And, when management had to defend it and say, well, yeah, it's plausible, rightfully so, the board member was, so why didn't we do it yet? I think it's a more nuanced discussion that we could get into and related to that industry. But it's right to ask, is it even plausible to plan something that might not come out in the future to say, we're just going to cut expenses by 15%? Well, is that really reality? The one I was smiling about, Tim mentioned, was assess the scenario impacts. And why this is important is the whole purpose of doing this is to look and say, if these things happen, how does this impact our strategy? So we sat down and we set out a course and we came up with a strategic plan that said, these are the 3 things we're going to invest in, and we're going to differentiate ourselves in the marketplace, and we're going to win and be successful. We go through, we do a scenario analysis and say, what if these things happen? Can we still impact our plan? What decision will we have to make? Because we all agreed X amount of time ago that was the right direction to go. Now we have the information that says to us, if these things happen, we could potentially still follow through our path. And that's what I think is kind of the most important step in this is, and you've heard me say it earlier in this webinar, hold the vision. Hold the vision. You sat down and you said this was the vision. Do all these things to make sure you're holding that vision. So again, we go up the steps, evaluate goals. I think that kind of aligns with what we were just talking about. Develop those contingency plans. A manufacturer might say, okay, we've looked at what happens if our main supplier goes down and says you have a 6-month hold. What are we going to have to do? What's our contingency plan? Well, it's to go out and find additional suppliers and make sure they're in the background, or maybe then we don't make that, we make Y. A nonprofit might say, hey, what if this grant goes away that funds 30% of our workforce? What could we do in contingency? Because we're not going to want to let those people go and then get the grant back or something back a year later and not have the workforce. What could we do to diversify our revenue, or where could we find additional sources of funds to hold them over? And then obviously you heard me say it with KPIs. Continue to review, update scenario analysis, monitor, and adapt them.
Yeah, so I'm going to give a really simple example of scenario analysis, one that I've actually worked on a few years back, but it's a story I like to tell. We worked with a contractor. He owned a fairly significant contracting company, and what they did was they had 2 service lines. They built stairways, so stairways in commercial buildings, which I presume is crazy, and they also built doorways. So they built and framed and put all the doorways into commercial buildings. So if you're building a hospital, if you're building a school, if you're building whatever, they could do both of those things. As you can imagine, the stairway jobs, much more expensive, required much more skilled workmen, required equipment, lifts, and other things like that, presented some risk, had insurance costs and other things as being because they had guys in the air and all those sort of things, but they were much more lucrative. They had a lot more revenue associated with them. The doorways was a lot faster builds, all on the ground generally, and not generally as much fun, not as cool. But good revenue, but not as much, right? So the contractor, he had inherited the business from his father. His strategic plan was to double the size of the business. He wanted to take over some geographic areas, and he wanted to basically create a business that both of his sons could eventually work for. He wanted the volume of the business to be big enough that he could employ both of his sons as project managers, and they could continue to pass on the name. So as part of it, when we had a discussion, we started to do some scenario analysis on how best he could grow. And when we first started out, he wanted to grow stairways. He said the company has built themselves on building stairways. That's what we're known for. I think we should continue to do that, and we should actually stop doing the doorways. And I should, get 4 or 5 more crews that can do doorways and continue to build those relationships. When we actually did the financial analysis, he made almost a third more on the bottom line and in volume by doing the doorways, believe it or not. So we do this whole analysis, and all the costs associated with doing the stairwells, his margin was significantly lower. Also, his customers were smaller in the stairway space. They were more loyal, certainly, and they were using him entirely. But in the doorway space, he was getting a lot more volume of work. And so what he ultimately decided, and was his best groove to be in after we did all of this scenario analysis, was he needed one crew to do stairways. That kept his loyal customers happy, and he could continue to do that work. It was a little bit lower margin. And if he was going to grow to double his business, he had to grow it in doorways. He set out a 3-year plan to try to double the size of the doorway thing, hire more and more crews to do that. And he ended up ultimately making a lot more revenue and a lot more money because we did a very good, effective scenario planning over the 2 different service lines that he had and what was going to be the more effective one to grow. And it was the exact opposite of what he thought when we first started talking with each other. So just a really simple, very, very straightforward scenario planning analysis, but one that was really fun to do, and was really ended up being very good for the business owner. John, I think you have an example as well.
I have an example. I'm going to tie it into this next slide a little bit too. So really moving from everything we talked about today, and again, we can all read it, goals, you heard the theme, setting the strategic goals, setting the alignment, action, and then measuring it. So that's really the takeaway. One of the ones, I look at it is a project I did this summer. A nonprofit came to us and said, hey, we're a pretty large provider. It looks like overall we provide very similar services, but we provide those similar services to very unique and very specific populations. And one of those, what they would call service line, wasn't making any, was basically dragging down the enterprise. And they were looking at the way the world was going, the regulations, the state reimbursement. And their question was, they came to us and said, is there the potential that this service line that we're doing related to this specific population could bring us down over here? So what they had was they had a goal. They said, if we're going to be in that marketplace and we're going to be providing these residential services, we're going to do it with the highest quality, and we're going to have the people, they're going to be paid a fair rate, and they're going to be trained, and they're going to be given a pathway to move up in their career. What they said is, part of that goal is we need to look at this other one that might not be reimbursing us correctly and say, should we continue to do that? So that's why they came to us with the goal. One of the things we looked at is we kind of went through the process and we said, well, okay, what are the KPIs here? What are the KPIs of this program as we compare it and benchmark it across the state? Where are your numbers? And what we found was basically it varied in terms of what their cost per unit for that was. So we said, okay, what's going on here? And we looked and we said, some of it relates to alignment. Again, not senior management, but making sure you were aligned on what those individuals were doing at the residence in terms of where they were coming from, how they were trained, what your employee turnover was being experienced there, also what the intake process was. Again, that was something a little bit out of their control, but it's something we had to look at. We used KPIs to benchmark it. And then we said, okay, let's come up with some actions related to that we can talk about, some that maybe we can effectuate. Can we express a better story about why this population is harder to treat? Can we come up with a story that says, hey, if these individuals want to work, if this employed workforce wants to work at this location, this is what we're willing to do in terms of cost structure to get a higher quality there. So they took an action on it. And now what they're doing is they're able to measure those results and see if they're moving in the right direction. Because where they were when they first came to us with the goal was they really said, geez, we're thinking about cutting down a significant service line that could really impact access to care in their community. And kind of we said, let's take a better look, let's take a different look through KPI and scenario analysis to this strategy. And maybe let's look at it differently before we make a decision that we don't want to do. We put some, what I would say, measures in place, things they could react to buy it more time, again, not to affect the service within the community.
That's a great story, John. Why don't we go ahead and skip your cool puzzle slide?
Well, you don't like my puzzle slide. All right.
I like it.
Brings it all together.
We just don't have time for it. Let's bring it together with the key takeaways because we're up against our time and I'm sure people want to go about their business. So key takeaways, a couple of things. I mean, strategy. We talked about this. It's about making intentional choices. If your organization doesn't feel like it has a good strategic plan, I highly recommend you go through some type of process to determine, where it is that your organization is headed and what you want to do, and get yourself sort of grounded in these are the choices that we want to make as an organization. It'll make a lot of things over the next year or 2 or 3 easier as you react in your industry to changes and competitors and law changes and regulations and other things that allow you to stay grounded in the decisions you want to make as an organization. Secondly, it's KPIs and data analytics is where it's at. It's where John and I live. We try to figure out what kind of data is available at any organization so we can analyze it and tell them the things in the different choices that they've made and how they reflect against what they want to accomplish as an organization. John just gave a great example. I've worked with a lot of nonprofits as well that say, man, these numbers stink and we're going to have to cut a service line. And we say, hang on, let's look at like how this service line interacts with other service lines. If it's a feeder, what are the different ways why this is important to your organization? Is it really time to actually just cut bait and move, or is it something that we should be looking at differently? And I think that that's a really important thing. The third is scenario analysis. I mean, again, helping leadership and helping finance function make really accurate decisions is taking the additional time to plan out some scenarios on whether it works one direction or the other. Could be worse, could be better than you think, and really seeing what the effect is, because sometimes the effect is an unexpected effect. It's not what you think would happen when certain types of revenue go down or employee turnover goes up or whatever the case may be. It may be different than you would normally expect. And then last, and this is where I live all the time, is monitoring. It's just continuing to evaluate, the process in which you make decisions as an organization, the information that you use, and the pivots that you might make as things change. If laws and regulations change over this next year, inflation changes, or the economy makes a shift, or some regulation hits your industry specifically, and you have to make a change because of it. Are you prepared to do all of the work that you need to determine what the change is within your strategic plan, within the long-term mission of your organization, and do you have the data and ability to do that? And then do you have the stomach for it? And all that stuff kind of comes together. So those are our key takeaways. John, I'd like you to go to the last slide, and then John, I'll let you have the final words, buddy. But just some information on us. Here's our contact information. John and I love this stuff. We love to talk about it. We get to work with clients. We're so blessed. We get to work with clients every day on their strategy and operations and being efficient and completing their mission. And we love this kind of stuff. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have thoughts, questions, your organization is interested in having a conversation with us. We'd love to talk. And I'll let John kind of have the sort of final words on really just a great topic for us and something that we really we really enjoy doing and working with clients on. So go ahead, John, take it away.
Oh, actually, Tim, somebody wants to see the puzzle slide. Actually,
all right,
it's really
fine.
Sorry, it's more of a sum. We're integrating everything. What it's meant to say is we got to integrate everything together. But again, it's not like a funnel. It's like a puzzle, not like a funnel. But what it's saying is we got to be doing strategic goals, data analytics, KPIs, scenario analysis. They're all interconnected. They're separate, but they're interconnected, and we got to work better. I guess it's showing it as a puzzle is a little bit different than saying you can't operate in silos. But as Tim said, this is something that I enjoy doing. I enjoy the challenges. I enjoy looking at the KPIs. Some of might know that I'm on a couple boards. We got one put right in front of me the other day. We're having a matter, and I pretty much took this approach and said, okay, what are we trying to achieve by doing this, and what's the KPI? And then I saw kind of the KPIs in the John Miller way of not saying, hey, so this is what I was thinking. I see your KPIs. Let me know what the 3 or 4 things that you're monitoring that we're going to do. And also let me know how I can help get some of those things done as well. So it is something we live and breathe every day, and it's something we enjoy doing. And really thank you for spending the hour with us this afternoon.
Yes, hopefully. Thank you for spending an hour. Hopefully you got at least one thing out of us. It might have been that you should be doing an inventory of your data. Who knows? I mean, maybe that's a thing that you might be thinking about now. But John, great job, buddy. I really appreciate John taking the bulk of this and putting this together. It's wonderful to present with him. And thank you so much for spending an hour with us. And we hope you have a fantastic week.
All right. Thank you.